Hi, everybody. Welcome to our class for this week. A short little class on the flavors of emptiness. And I've just been super busy last little bit, which is why it's taken me a while to put out this next one here. So again, just sort of like a little short meditation and sort of contemplation for us to do here together on Mahamudra, or the emptiness of the mind. So for auspiciousness, I'll start with the Heart Sutra here. Homage to the perfection of wisdom, the Blessed Mother. Thus I've heard at one time the Blessed One was dwelling in Rajgir and Mass Vulture's Mount, together a great assembly of monks and nuns and great assembly of bodhisattvas. That time the Blessed One was absorbed in the concentration of countless aspects of phenomena called profound illumination. That time also Spirit of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the great being, was looking perfectly at the practice of profound perfection of wisdom, looking perfectly also the five aggregates being empty of inherent existence. Then, through the power of Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to Spirit of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the great being, how should a son of the lineage trained who wishes to engage in the practice of profound perfection of wisdom? Thus he spoke, and Spirit of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the great being, replied to Venerable Shariputra as follows. Shariputra, whatever son or daughter of the lineage wishes to engage in the practice of profound perfection of wisdom should look perfectly like this. Subsequently, looking perfectly and correctly also the five aggregates be empty of inherent existence, form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form is not other than emptiness. Likewise, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, because all phenomena are emptiness, having no characteristics, not produce and do not cease. They have no defilement, no separation from defilement. They have no decrease and no increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness, there's no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, and no consciousness. There's no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mentality, no form, no sound, no smell, no taste, no tactile object, no phenomenon. There's no I element and so forth up to no mentality element, also no element of mental consciousness. There's no ignorance and no exhaustion of ignorance and so forth up to no aging and death, no exhaustion of aging and death. Likewise, there's no suffering, origin, cessation, or path, no exalted awareness, no attainment, also no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, because there's no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and abide in the perfection of wisdom. Their minds have no obstructions and no fear. Passing on or beyond perversity, they attain the final nirvana. Also, all Buddhas reside perfectly in the three times, having relied upon the perfection of wisdom, became manifest complete Buddhas in state of unsurpassed, perfect and complete enlightenment. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the equal and the unequal mantra, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, since the stockpile should be known as the truth. Mantra of perfection of wisdom is proclaimed, Tayata Gada Gada Paragata Parsam Gadi Bodhisoha. Shariputra, Bodhisattva, great being, should train a profound perfection of wisdom like this. Then the Blessed One arose in that concentration and said to Spirit of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the great being, that he'd spoken well. Good, O son of lineage, just like that. Since it's like that, just as you have revealed, in that way the profound perfection of wisdom should be practiced, and the Tathagatas will also rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, Venerable Shariputra, the Spirit of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the great being, the entire circle of disciples, as well as worldly beings, gods, humans, demigods, and spirits, were delighted and highly praised what had been spoken by the Blessed One. Okay, so let's also just take a moment to take refuge and generate bodhicitta. So from our hearts, again, just like sort of a Mahamudra refuge here, we're taking refuge in emptiness, in Buddha Shakyamuni, and all holy beings as being sort of the instantiation of Buddha nature, of emptiness and mind realizing emptiness directly, and as an example of how to do that. The teachings they teach are the path of how to see emptiness directly, which is the antidote to all self-cherishing based on self-grasping of inherent existence, and the antidote to all suffering, therefore. And refuge, the whole community of people supporting one another and supporting us on our path to seeing emptiness directly, the emptiness of the mind. So I and all sentient beings in two each even go for refuge to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And no bodhicitta, just we're doing all this with a mind of great compassion, great love, to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings, just like we're suffering. Once we become Buddha, we will teach them how to see emptiness directly, and so they can relieve their own sufferings and do the same for others. So anything we do, all the positive virtue that we do or good energy here today or throughout the rest of the day or our lives here, may be put towards this whole journey, this whole path. So through the virtues we collect by giving out the perfections, may we become a Buddha for the benefit of all. Okay, so this is the fifth out of six, fifth out of six flavors of emptiness. And so we've talked, the other four classes about the four other flavors, like first one in sort of the practical or therapeutic consequences or applications of these. So the first one being the Vaibhashika system, basically everything is impermanent. This being a whole sort of universal acid to burn down all the structures in your life that create suffering for yourselves and for others. In particular, seeing that because your five skandhas are impermanent, there can't be something permanent separate from them, or a controller, or sort of some kind of immortal, unchanging soul or some or mind or something that somehow part of these and yet unrelated at the same time, because it doesn't change. Everything changes except for this. This kind of position eliminates all of that and attacks our self-cherishing based on our self-grasping directly. Moving into the second flavor of emptiness, that things, the whole sort of causal or interconnected process of this interpenetrating, interdependent flow of becoming is forced on you. It's something not chosen because it's part of you, it's part of the process. So this sort of gets rid of not just sort of some kind of inherently existing soul or eye or mind, but also one that somehow direct or controlling the process through its own will or application. This sort of goes away. Now that's the Sautrantika, or a sort of Logicist Sutra school. Based on the Abhidharma teachings. Then moving into third and fourth flavors of emptiness, we're in the great, very influential, he and one of the two great schools of emptiness in the Mahayana Buddhist tradition or Buddhist world, this being Yogacara, Chittamantra, mind only. In particular, sort of first articulated by the great Saint Arya Asanga, based on teachings he received directly from Buddha, the future Buddha, Buddha Maitreya. And this is prophesied by Buddha himself, that hundreds of years after Buddha's death, that this great saint would arise and propagate the Mahayana and further articulate it in this and that. So, just like I said with Yogacara here, we have an idea that mind and objects are interdependent, dependent arisings, and they arise from the same seed. So the experiences you have and the mind you have experienced them come from the same energy that you created in the past. So the way the movie of your life is unfolding for you or being revealed at this very moment is because of past karma. You don't get one without the other. So there isn't some kind of mind or soul waiting for things to happen or being the victim of things happening. Things are forced on you in the sense that they're arising at the same time as you, sort of underneath your conscious choices, so to speak. You're being thrown or put into a world from your past karma, and this is all mind because it's all a stream of awareness. It's all like a dream that you're in. So you don't get objects without minds or minds without objects, and these arise from the same seed within sort of an overarching backdrop of awareness, or a laya vijnana, as mind only school, hence mind only. So what you're interacting with, really, you are in the theater of the mind, and you're interacting with your karma. Now, then that would be the third flavor of emptiness, is that, so the third flavor is that everything happens to you basically for a reason, and that's that everything's your own mind. Now, the fourth flavor being is all your conceptual constructs you overlay on this. It's something you're doing, the judgments you're making on this process, the objects that are arising to you for your karma. This sort of realm of the imaginary isn't real in any way because it's somehow separate or not tagged onto things. So the flavor of emptiness, like you can see that the third flavor of emptiness, like if we're working that everything is impermanent, everything's forced on you, third flavor of emptiness puts you into this amazing existential thing where it's just basically you and your world are the same thing. Everything is your mind. And so there isn't that sense of where, like, oh my God, how is this happening to me? This isn't fair. I'm the big victim. I'm in this world outside of my control. Technically, this world and you are the same thing. And so there's all sorts of, terrifying consequences coming, but all sorts of very, very positive consequences. We can see therapeutically what that does, that it puts you into the controlling seat for the first time, which is amazing. Even though things are coming at you from your karma, it's actually orientating things towards you existentially and on a subjective level, which is good. But also, the fourth flavor of emptiness sort of gets rid of the idea that that your concepts, your constructs, and judgments in this are inherently existing themselves. They are posits from your own mind, and so they could be different. They're relative. They could be different. They're coming from you. And why is that important? Well, that as an object of negation, that the emptiness of that it takes out is the idea of we always trust our judgments to be infallible. Our way of seeing the world we always take to be absolutely always already the case, universal and necessary, unchanging, completely correct. But really, if we start to see that this isn't the way the world is independent of us, but it's the sort of overlay we're putting on the world, we can take responsibility for it. We can change it. We can also see its limitation, right? Uh, phenomenology, they call things horizontal in the sense that, that there's a horizon of different appearances, interconnected appearances, let's say, whatever, of my mala or something. So why they use the term horizon is that that it's a limit. Horizon's really big, it's before you, oh my goodness, but it's also, there's a limit, it's encapsulated. One thing that's revealed necessarily closes off or it conceals something else. So it's the same thing with our judgments and our, conceptual structures we overlay on things. And I always think that I remember arguing with one of my philosophy professors like 30 years ago, and he's like, "Oh my God, like, are you saying metaphysical systems, are, somehow violent or whatever?" And I was just like, "Well, of course they are." And of course, this is the classic postmodernist claim, but our ideas and our sort of theories and judgments and metaphysical systems and political structures and power structures do make a difference. They can really benefit people, or they can really hurt people. You can see how often your judgments and own views on things can really, really injure even yourself, let alone other people. What you take yourself to be, what you take the world to be, and the consequences you draw from that. So this mind-only position, the fourth flavor of emptiness, I think is a very, very practical and a good one, to see that your judgments, your theories, your views come from yourself and aren't necessary. You can see that almost as what they call the third order of being and so forth, from a Chittamantran point of view. These things are just, sort of posits of the mind. They don't have a referent for the most part, or really any part. And that's why in mind-only system, you sort of get rid of them. And the ultimate point of view from that system is just pure awareness of Alaya Vijnana, storehouse conscious, or Kunshi. Now we move into, so from that, where do we go? Well, when we start dealing with concepts and objects, we start going and seeing their interdependence. If we're seeing mind and objects coming from a similar seed, then we're starting to see mind and their objects being the dependent arising and hence being empty. So anyway, there's a long story here. I don't want to keep it too long, but what the next sort of school you get is the Madhyamika or middle way school from the famous saint from southern India, Arya Nagarjuna, again prophesized by Buddha, sometimes often called the second Buddha. And the middle way school, Madhyamika school, is of course influential right across Mahayana Buddhism, and even in the world, just other systems, other cultures. It's had an enormous impact philosophically on a spiritual level, whether we see through Tibetan Buddhism or Zen or anything else for the last 2,000 years. And Arya Nagarjuna, kind of like an immortal saint in Buddhism, he lived for like 600 years or something crazy like that, is seen as one of the most influential people in Buddhism, like in a sense that he was one of these people that the moment he published his stuff or put his stuff out, everything changed. You couldn't ignore what he'd done. He literally changed Buddhism as an entire religion. And it's kind of like a door to a new religion. It's sort of like a new rupture, so to speak. It's almost like we've gone off in another direction when we've gone there. It's a complete new continent of knowledge that he ended up founding with the Madhyamika school. So the fifth flavor of emptiness, where it starts, is that if objects in mind are interdependent, like they are in a conventional level in the Yogacara school, the idea that this being is grounded or underpinned by just a pure awareness runs into problems, according to Madhyamika thinkers like Nagarjuna, his students, Aryadeva, Baba Viveka, Buddha Palita, the famous one, Chandrakirti, Nagabodhi, and it just keeps going on. Then you get all the great Tibetan Buddhist scholars that are great Madhyamika thinkers and so forth. But basically, if everything's in a relationship, if mind by definition has an object and they're interdependent, hence empty, on a conventional level, how can we claim that on an ultimate level, mind exists substantially outside of a relationship with anything else without an object, like the Yogacara or mind only school does? How is that possible? Right? So they're not stupid. Of course, they're going to end up saying, well, mind itself is always changing, so it's impermanent. I'm just saying it is the substratum or foundation for reality, sort of like the movie you're in. The fact that you're in a movie shows that alaya vijnana, or that the basis of reality is awareness, hence mind only. Madhyamika school will say again, so the analogy they use is that it's kind of like before the Yogacara people say that before a light can light the room, it lights itself, right? So in other words, before you have individual awarenesses or consciousnesses with their object, you have to have awareness in general as a ground making that possible. So in a Heideggerian sense, being is awareness. Being is mind. What is being? Being is mind. So there is something ontological. We're saying something truly exists, and that's mind. That's what makes everything possible. That's what makes the flow of experience, the movie, the dream you're in possible, the ground of reality. But again, if that's the case, this has to exist outside of a relationship, right? It has to be, from their argument, transcendent rather than transcendental. If it's transcendental and related to the individual conventional objects and minds, it collapses into them, right? But we want to separate them out in the Chittamatra school and add sort of dividing line of the imaginary conceptual structures and keep them separate. So you have ultimate truth and conventional truth separated. Madhyamika says, how's that possible? If we're talking about everything being interconnected, then they can't be separate by definition. They have to be together, either causally or in terms of wholes and parts or in terms of designation. They are in a system of relationships. So by nature, they can't be standing outside. They can't exist from their own side, as Madhyamikas always like to say, outside of a relationship, which is precisely in the Yogacara school what they're claiming to do. That's a problem. So the put down you get in sort of the classical Indian texts is, how can a light light itself? That's like a knife cutting itself. So I've got my knife before I cut into my steak. Before, in the act of cutting, what the knife is doing is cutting itself before it cuts the meat. And they say, like, that doesn't even make sense. You know, like, just whatever. Before I turn the shower on, the shower itself gets wet before it gets me wet. Like, you can start to see, like, as an argument, it doesn't make much sense. So basically what you see happens is we don't have a foundation. Ontology itself disappears. Metaphysics disappears. Metaphysics in the Aristotelian sense of, you know, the doctrine of being qua being, what things are in and of themselves. If mind only school, we say that the ultimate basis of reality is mind, inherently existent. The sort of universal acid of the Madhyamika critique goes all the way down and even critiques that. So we have a groundless ground. There is no ground. What the ground is emptiness, which is basically there is no ground, right? So Trungpa Rinpoche, the great quote, bad news is you're falling, good news is there's no ground that you're going to hit. It's just all the way down, right? So then why be scared? You're not going to hit anything. You know, it's like the dreams where you're falling. It's like, oh, I'm just in the sky. I'm not going to hit anything. Then I'm floating. Then I'm flying, right? So this is the Madhyamika critique of this, of mind only school. So we go into the fifth flavor of emptiness based on this. Now, what's interesting is that Madhyamika philosophy, and they don't know, I think Donald Lopez did a book on this, on Satrantika Madhyamika, where he was claiming that in particular, the Lupa tradition we're in draws a very specific distinction between lower and higher Madhyamika, between what they call the autonomous syllogism, lower Madhyamika, called a Swatantrika Madhyamika, and the middle way consequentialist Madhyamika Prasangika, higher Madhyamika schools. So you divide them in half here. Don Lopez says that in India, they never really had this division in the scholastic schools. The person that posited more of the lower school Madhyamika was the great Saint Buddhist scholar and great Lama Baba Viveka. It was one of Aryadeva's students. And what's interesting is once he put that out, you had great scholars, even like Shankarashita and a lot of others, that mixed Madhyamika with Yogacara and worked on this quote unquote lower form of the Madhyamika school, the Sautrantika school, which is interesting. And so what you actually get when you read these sort of like in the debating manuals, you're debating all these positions, everyone's sitting around arguing with each other. The lower Madhyamika school, you can even subdivide it further, right, between the what they call Sautrantika Spotantrika Madhyamika or the Yogacara Spotantrika Madhyamika. Now, as someone who's very avidly Wittgensteinian in sort of a fan even of ordinary language philosophy. My prejudice is that when I don't like metaphysics, for instance, I don't like big systems. I think it's, anyway, my own sort of personal prejudices and so forth, but almost like these sort of Cambridge philosophers in the 1930s. But when someone presents to me very complicated metaphysics or very complicated philosophies, I'm instantly suspicious, and the bullshit detector beep 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 that starts going off, thinking, it's a prejudice to think that reality has to be simple and open and just kind of easy to get. I mean, I know that that's kind of a presumption I'm making, but I'm just saying when the Madhyamika school, what starts to, you get all these hyphens like this, the red, blue, and green, like, or whatever. Like, I'm always thinking, oh, okay, this, like, right away, there's something that stinks here. But anyway, just further going on. So what you end up claiming with this lower Madhyamika school, Baba Viveka, why they call it the autonomous school, is like the Yogacara school. Baba Viveka says that on a conventional level, mind and objects do exist publicly and inherently. Okay. Now, on an ultimate level, see, because the two truths, conventional, ultimate level, we know they don't. They're empty. But on a conventional level, there is a world and you in it, and it's a public world that you share with other people. Hence, autonomous syllogism is logically, we can make claims about things using language. Okay, so in other words, language can have a positive referent to it, right? Like we can both talk about, let's say, this piece of jade, right? And so with a syllogism, when you're doing predicate logic, you have to have a subject and a predicate use. In other words, consider this jade. This jade is green, whatever. And so we can have a debate on it. Willard Van Orman Quine had a critique of this. Of course, it is famous American, probably second most important philosopher of the 20th century. We called it the inscrutability of reference. It's a long story, but he has in his version of what they call indeterminacy of translation, inscrutability of reference, technically, if language as a whole, I mean, it's a very, very complicated argument. I myself will probably make a mistake trying to convey it to you, but in the sense that it's hard to say what language is pointing out, what kind of qualities language is pointing out when you're using it. It's not a one-to-one thing. So he famously said language isn't like a museum where you go and you see an exhibit and it says exhibit number 3, whatever, the Grecian urn, like the little sticker underneath it, where you can do it because, his claim is there's a thought experiment. You can come up, if you're trying to understand a foreign language, you can come up with different dictionaries. And if you don't have any evidence of how they all fit together on this language, each one of these dictionaries or sort of grammar manuals, that could stand for being correct. There wouldn't be any way to argue one against the other which one's more correct than the others. It's a long story, but what I'm getting at is that it's a similar thing Baba Viveka says, is that he says, unless we believe that there's a substantial public world we're in, that, in other words, conventionally mind and objects exist, we don't live in a public world, so language wouldn't work, concepts wouldn't work, they wouldn't stick onto anything. There'd be the quote-unquote inscrutability. What are you talking about? Inscrutability reference. What are you pointing at? Right? In other words, can't we agree in consensual reality? If we don't have this, there's no consensual reality. Right? What's the consensus? Well, the consensus, we all have to have a consensus on one thing. Is this a mala, or is whatever? Is it a piece of spaghetti I'm about to eat? So you see that that's the claim that he's making. And so the claim, I mean, Donald Lopez said that like he himself didn't believe this, but used this almost as an intro manual for students to teach the higher final flavor of emptiness, the sixth flavor, the middle way consequentialist school, which is the opposite of this. What we'll see in the middle way consequentialist school is that reason only functions negatively. You can never posit anything, because even the act of positing, you're claiming it has inherent existence. So it can only be a negative critique that you're bringing. Hence, middle way consequentialists. I can only show how other people are making mistakes by positing reality, showing them, saying, nope, don't do that, you can't. Things will hang in the air without being attached to anything. And hence, that's the real idea of middle way, is that things don't have a foundation. But where we are right here on the fifth flavor of emptiness, the Madhyamika, Tantrika school, is that there is a public world, there is something on a conventional level subsistent. Now, Baba Viveka will say that when you actually look closer on an ultimate level, things are empty. But on conventional level, they have to be substantially working or separate from you. Mind, there is a world. They arise independent of each other, but they're inherently existing on a conventional level. So things work. Language works, conceptuality works. There's a target that I can put on. There is a base for me to stick a label on. We always talk about Madhyamika labels and bases. On the label of, black and metal and round and two little hands, I can say watch. So those pieces that become the whole have to be out there separate from me to label on. Otherwise, how would I know? How would I be able to put labels on anything if they're not true? If it's all kind of an infinite regress of labels, how would that work? It wouldn't be able to work. It would all kind of collapse and fall apart, right? This was the thing people accused Quine of, where he said that basically there's no analytic synthetic distinction in logic, and so everything's revisable. So people would say the same thing. Well, if everything's revisable, wouldn't everything fall apart in the web of belief? Wouldn't we just almost divide through like a long division and nothing would hang together? Where would be your being? Where would be the ontology? So ontologically, you see that on the lower Madhyamika school, we are making claims about things, hence autonomous syllogism. We can make claims about things. We can use predicate logic. We can refer. We can all talk together about something existent in the world. Now, when we do a deeper Madhyamika critique and look for where is this ontology, ultimately we can't find it. But it appears standing against you as something substantial on a conventional level. Now, what's interesting is, like I said, you get, just for a scholastic point of view, you get where they talk about the, you can either have the Sautrantika or Yogacara Svotantrika Madhyamika. In other words, some Svotantrika Madhyamikas will say that mind and objects are still part of mind, that they're coming like from a karmic seed. So this lower Madhyamika school is more akin to Chittamantra or Yogacara. And then others will be more realists, like the lower Vaibhashika and Sautrantika system, where they say the objects independent of my mind on a conventional level are in the world, separate from me, sort of flows of dharmas or whatever, particles, or what do you want to say, right? So then there's a big debate, and then the question you'd have to ask is, how is this settled? Is there a world independent of me on a conventional level, or is it just my mind? So you can see where what's interesting is all this sort of going, all the big debates is setting up for the final, like Alexander the Great cutting through the Gordian knot in Macedonian, being able to conquer Asia through the final, deepest, and actually more simpler flavor of emptiness, the Madhyamika middle way consequential school, where it's the idea of cutting through things. So there you go. Now, so that's the fifth flavor of emptiness. And of course, the consequences for this is practically, like, that's sort of the scholarly thing. What is the emptiness of self for the lower Madhyamika, the Tantrika Madhyamika? Well, they will deny that self, that the mind is something inherently existent, separate from the five aggregates. They will also deny that mind is a controller separate from that controlling experience. Because again, you see that objects in the world that we're labeling, or labels and bases and so forth, are being forced on you, and they're impermanent. So that being the case, that gets rid of all those sort of lower, coarser misunderstandings of what the I is or what the ego is. So on those sort of their coarser understandings of the emptiness of self, when we go deeper, they will even say that what we can talk about self is just mind. That basically the mind labeling conventional reality here is the only thing we can really talk about as being self. So they'll end up saying that, right? And this is more sort of the lower Madhyamika people that agree with a lot of the Yogacara points of view. But what Geshe Michael Roach says is kind of interesting. So I'll just talk about the analogy. I mentioned this before. The classical, and it might even be in Baba Vika's text. I don't really know. You'd have to check it out. But the analogy he uses is, of course, the street magic. That sort of medieval street magic in India. There's an amazing magician just that was down in the farmers market here in Nelson that we just love, and he's very, very good. And you can see this. So the idea in street magic in India, you have to have some kind of a thing like a stick or whatever, and then you say a mantra, and then it appears as something different. So the stick, I throw the stick on the ground, poof, it becomes an elephant, and the audience is, oh my God, I can't believe he changed the stick into an elephant. So what they always say is that, okay, the magician sees the stick as an elephant, but he knows it's fake. So I throw it on the ground, I cast a spell, I'm seeing the elephant, but I know it's just the spell. I know it's just my mind. I know it's just a projection. The crowd thinks it's a real elephant. Okay, so this is the difference, is that the crowd represents ignorance, in the sense that ignorance that ultimately everything is empty of inherent existence, but also that things appear truly existent even on a conventional level, that mind and objects appear completely separate, when really on this lower Madhyamika school, we're showing them as dependently arising or together. And so the crowd represents your ignorance at the most coarse, vulgar level, where you think everything you see is exactly the way it is and unchanging, has nothing to do with your mind. The magician represents the conventional nature of the mind in the lower Madhyamika school. In other words, he sees the object and the mind being interdependent, but also how how it can appear as something different or unrelated. And that's the idea of the elephant coming out of the stick, for instance, that he can see. Now, the third person they introduce this is someone who shows up late to the magic trip, who's got caught on a car jam or something, and shows up half an hour late. So he doesn't see anything. The guy showing up into the audience half an hour late just sees everyone go, oh my God, wow, an elephant. He doesn't see an elephant, and he doesn't see the trick. He doesn't know what's happening. He just sees the magician there standing on the stage with a stick and doesn't really know what's going on. He's missed the trick. So he sees nothing. So he represents the ultimate perspective that everything is empty from this school, right? The Madhyamika, the final Madhyamika sort of ultimate truth to the matter. Okay, so you can see this is a complicated view of emptiness. It's a very complicated school, which is why I like to say that the more complicated it gets, the more you have a problem with it. This is seen as crucial in the Gelugpa tradition, because Tsongkhapa, the founder of our tradition, one of the great philosophers in Buddhism and scholars and yogis, let alone in Tibetan Buddhism, this was his getting clear on this position of the lower Madhyamika school, this Svatantra Madhyamika school, but also what's wrong with it, and their understanding of emptiness and how flawed it is, and how once you see the flaw in it, you go instantly into the Prasangika school and see the correct view of emptiness. You have a very, very profound understanding of emptiness. This is what was responsible for him getting enlightened. So I just like to tell the story. It's in Robert Thurman's Essence True Eloquence, translation of Tsongkhapa's famous book, where he talks about this. That book is a discussion of mind only and the lower Madhyamika school, understanding emptiness. How do objects exist on a conventional level. What does it really mean to say that they're posited by the mind? How do they exist? What's the relationship between concepts and objects, between your labels and the basis? And that is crucial. That's all in that book, whereas it's seen as kind of like his masterpiece. But the claim is that he was having a really hard time with this, and then made prayers, went to bed, and then had a dream. Oh, he wakes up in the dream, lucid dream, and he's actually at one of Buddha's teachings. Buddha Shakyamuni is just teaching. There's a bit of a break, and then he's in the audience. Somebody knows what's going on, and then he sees in the audience Bhava Viveka, Buddha Palita, Chanakirti, Nagarjuna, everybody arguing philosophy in the audience, and he's like, "What's that?" And then, in particular, they're arguing this point, the status of the conventional nature of the world in the Madhyamika Sotantrika school. So Buddha Palita is arguing Bhava Viveka on this, the Prasangika critique of the lower Madhyamika school. So Jason comes like, "Oh my God, I can't believe they're talking about this." And he's listening. And then the claim is that, the story, Jason Gam said, is that Buddha Palita got up in the audience and walked toward Tsongkhapa and had his book, which has the answer to this question, and then kind of like puts it on his head, gives him a blessing. So in the morning, Tsongkhapa wakes up and goes, "I know what to do." So he runs over, gets Buddha Palita's book, looks in the index, finds that spot in the book, ding, he gets the solution to this problem, which is his understanding of the Prasangika understanding of emptiness, of the relationship between ultimate and conventional truths, which is best expressed, Tsongkhapa says, in Chanakirti's further presentation of this. And then, of course, Tsongkhapa based his whole philosophy, the whole Galupa view of emptiness, on this classical Indian position. So we'll see a little bit about that next time. But this is why it's important. So you can see, how does this cash out to you practically? I'm always trying to say this has sort of been more of a philosophical class here, but how does this sort of come out practically? Is for Madhyamika, like for Mahamudra, I should say, when you're looking at thoughts or feelings, they seem separate from you, but on an ultimate level, we know they're not. So as Geshe Michael Roach was saying, is basically it kind of comes to you this way, where it appears karmically that half of the karma comes from the world, half of it comes for you. In other words, situations or your mind, facts in your experience are presented to you, and then you have to react to them. Half is what's being presented, half of it's the world, half of it's your reaction to it. Now, in the big picture and the ultimate level, we know this is all empty. We know it's all fictional. We know it's all just like a dream. But in our day-to-day basis, what we're doing is changing lemons into lemonade. That the world's being presented to you, good or bad, suffering situations, and then how you react to it, how you label it, how you manage it, how you deal with it in terms of your projections, makes you what you are karmically. So you can see that this is the position, the philosophical position of mindfulness on a very sort of vulgar way, not mindfulness, I should say lojong, thought transformation on a very sort of coarse way. In other words, whatever happens to you, turn it into something positive, power of positive thinking, right? Something like, use it as a teaching tool, use it as a pedagogical model for yourself to be a better Dharma person. Stuff's coming at you, you can't control it, it's the result of your karma. And the key is, how are you labeling it? How are you seeing it, right? Big picture, because things are empty, in an ultimate level, I can do this. But the point is, you've got a problem coming at you. You've got a suffering. You've got stuff you're dealing with, the world, your life. How am I dealing with it? It's all my mind. It's all my attitude. It's all how I label or see things. Okay? So the world is coming at me. How am I managing it? Right? So it's the same thing with Mahamudra. I see things, I'm having certain feelings, thoughts, and experiences. How am I dealing with this? Well, I'm dealing with this in the best way possible, with a sense of openness, with loving kindness, with mindfulness, with compassion, and so forth. So this is more of an alchemical model on this level. It becomes even a higher alchemical model on the Prasangika level, but it's kind of like, how do I transform lead into gold? I'm being given lead, truly existent lead, basically, on a conventional level. What am I going to do with it? How am I going to change things around? Stuff's coming at me. How am I going to judo flip it? Bad stuff. How am I going to pacify it? How am I going to transform it? Mind transformation. So even on how could I can see the emptiness of the Mahamudra in this, because if I stand back, it's all like a dream, it's all empty. But in terms of practically in my day-to-day life, I still have work to do. I'm still working on all this stuff. I'm still doing it. So there we go. That's the lower Madhyamika school, and is the fifth flavor of emptiness. And we'll just take a moment. Again, I was just going to say this, if you think about it as a Dharma person, most of the time as a good Dharma person, we're on this level. And that's why I'm saying that practically the mind-only school, and even the lower, the mind-only school teaches you, hey, everything is your mind, right? In other words, don't victimize yourself. Like I always say, like what Spinoza says, don't rage, don't cry, understand. It's taking responsibility, saying, this is your life, this is your movie. Taking it the next step to the lower Madhyamika, so Tantrika Madhyamika, is everything's your attitude, everything's your perspective, if everything is your mind, what's your response to the world? What's your response to the data that's being present to you? How are you labeling it? How are you seeing it? How are you transforming it? How are you working with it? How are you, redeeming it, alchemically transforming it, making it better? And this is the idea of taming your mind in Buddhism, right? Gom, meditation, familiarizing, habituating your mind with the virtuous object, right? Purifying your mind. This is that level we're working with the emptiness of the mind, because on an ultimate level, everything's empty. You can do this. You can purify, you can transform. Mind transformation. Okay, so let's dedicate this for our mind and the mind of all others. May they be transformed by blessings of all holy beings, truth of karma, the power of a pure spirit intention, our Dharma wishes be fulfilled. Okay, see you next time.